We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Manny Barbera. I am from the Silicon Valley Education Foundation and a recovering superintendent. And I am very pleased to be associated with the foundation after I retired. It's an excellent organization that is really doing some terrific work. One of the advocacy roles that we play is we put on forums on key relevant education issues. And this is the first time that we're here in San Mateo County. So this is the very first one. Normally we have them in Santa Clara County. I think we have an excellent program for you today. You're going to hear some fascinating research, and then a group of expert panelists who will be able to discuss it. And you'll also have a chance to interact with them. I'll give you some instructions on how to do that in just a little bit. Before we do that, I would like to introduce to you our CEO and leader of the Silicon Valley Education Foundation, who will say a few words about what we're all about. So please welcome Mohammed Chaudhry.
Welcome. So I want to tell you a little bit about the Silicon Valley Education Foundation. This is actually our first time we've crossed the border from Santa Clara County to San Mateo County. And we were joking that with John Miller, one of our board members, that we needed passports. We were prepared, Mark Berman and I, but we made it. It's a great place, and we appreciate the welcome. We look forward to working in San Mateo County as we've been working over the past 10 years in Santa Clara County. Just to tell you a little bit about the foundation, the Silicon Valley Education Foundation. We're just absolutely obsessed with preparing students for college and careers. We do it three ways: through policy and advocacy work, such as what you'll see today, talking about A to G, talking about the achievement gap, talking about issues that are relevant to making sure students are ready for college and careers. Second thing we do is really around direct programming with kids. Coming into the summer, we have our Elevate Math program, which prepares students to take and pass what used to be called algebra in 8th grade, who otherwise would not be. It's 75 hours of instruction. It provides 40 hours of professional development for teachers, does lots of great things over that summer, and we're seeing tremendous results, measurable results in the outcomes of this great program. And if you want to hear more about it, Deb Negrete come on over here, Deb. Come on this way. Come on this way. Deb, a former principal. You can talk to Deb, Colleen, and others. We'd love to have this in every middle school in the country eventually. I think it's a great program, and Deb's leading that effort. We also have an Elevate Science program, which prepares students for 9th grade biology, which Deb leads as well. So those are two programs where we served over 1,000 kids last summer. This summer we'll be serving over 2,000 kids, hopefully a lot of them in San Mateo County, so we're looking forward to that. The third part of our work is really around innovation. We've been very proud to be working with Eastside Union High School District, and Chris Funk. I think he just walked out because he's a shy guy, but the superintendent of Eastside Union High School District, around how do we work with innovation? How do we make sure that school districts have the right amount of funding for technology? How do we make sure that that funding has the right types of tools and resources in school districts, like cloud infrastructure, like privacy, like wireless infrastructure, all those pieces? And then how do we make sure, being in GSV Labs, how do we make sure that some of the companies that are actually in this building, these ed tech startups, how do we help them come into our education system in a good and meaningful way to prepare them to be able to add to increasing student achievement? Those are kind of our three high-level things that we do at the organization. Now we're going to do the most important item of the day. I'd like you to take out your cell phones. We want to make sure we spread the word on A to G and other things. So turn to the person next to you and take a selfie. Just do it. Entertain me. Just take a selfie. And if John Miller can take a selfie, anyone can take a selfie. Come on, John. There you go. Take one of the whole room if you like. There you go. She's really good at it. There. So here's mine. There we go. Okay, now that you've taken your selfie, I hope you've introduced yourself to the person next to you that you've now taken a picture with. We have our hashtag, which is AG Forum SVEF. I'd like you to tweet about the event and let others know about the event. Chris, you missed the selfie. I'm sure you're going to make up for it in a few minutes here. So go ahead and use the hashtag AG Forum SVEF. It's on your program as well, on the top of your program with information on how to log on and do many other things. So tell people about A to G. Most people don't even know what A to G means or stands for. You can explain that, and we hope you can carry the conversation beyond this room as well. The last thing I want to do is introduce our elected officials who are in the room today. First and foremost, one of our former colleagues in Silicon Valley Education Foundation, and now a new Santa Clara County Office of Education School Board member, Rosemary Kamei. Take a bow, Rosemary. Next, we have from the Mountain View Wistman School District, Ellen Wheeler. Ellen, I didn't see you. Oh, there you are. And we have from the Evergreen School District, Bonnie Mace. Bonnie? Bonnie's right over there, right behind you. And we have Reed Myers from the Sunnyvale School District. Reed? You took the best selfie. No, just my forehead, actually. It was them. Oh, you're still giving. Well, you take more. And we have Paymon Zargami from the San Jose Unified School District. Paymon? Susan Ellenberg from the San Jose Unified School District. And we have Mark Berman, who is a council member from the city of Palo Alto, a candidate for state assembly, as well as, most importantly, head of fund development at Silicon Valley Education Foundation. So if you have any money lying around, just take it to him. He'll take very good care of it. Greg, where are you? Greg? Take a bow, Greg. Did we miss anyone? Any aspiring elected officials in the audience? No? With that, we'll turn it back over to Manny. Thank you very much for coming here.
Thank you, Mohammed. For those of you that are so inclined and prefer a low-tech option of asking questions, my colleague Bob, there's Bob back there, has cards. And as you hear something during either the research presentations or during the panelist conversation, Bob has cards. You could write a question, he'll collect them, and he'll feed them to John. So you have that option as well. At this time, we tried very hard to get Ann Campbell. We even tried to schedule and reschedule this conference to see if Ann can do welcome. We just couldn't work it around her schedule. We couldn't quite fit, but we were able to have someone do double duty, serving on the panel and also doing a welcome on behalf of Ann, who's the county superintendent. And I'd like to introduce Brian Simmons, who's the Director of Accountability, Innovation, and Results. That's a good title in San Mateo County Office of Education. Please welcome Brian.
Thanks, Manny. So just quickly, on behalf of Superintendent Campbell, Superintendent Ann Campbell, I'd like to welcome you to San Mateo County, those of you who aren't from here, who have passports, I take it. She sends her regrets that she can't attend today's session. Superintendent Campbell is a former middle school teacher and counselor and absolutely understands the imperative role that middle school preparation and course taking holds for students' college preparation and readiness. She and all of us who support curriculum, instruction, and assessment at the county office lost my place here, at the county office, are working to ensure that the rigor of the new California standards is experienced and achieved by all of our students, but especially as it relates to mathematics, and especially among those students who have been historically underserved by our school districts. I look forward to hearing from our keynote speakers and then engaging in a robust dialogue about how to ensure authentic access for all of our students to a rigorous middle school experience that adequately prepares San Mateo youth for an equally rigorous and preparatory high school experience. Thank you for the chance to welcome you all.
Thank you, Brian. Before I introduce our first keynote speaker, Neil Finkelstein, I just want to say a few things a little bit in depth. Let's see, I'm supposed to do this. is it showing? It's not showing down here. Okay, so here we go. This is starting to kick on here. So let me just say a little bit about the foundation and a little bit more detail, if I can get this going here. There we go. So let me just move out here a little bit so I could share this with you. So as Mohammed mentioned, this is our vision. Our role is to transform Silicon Valley into a model for enhancing public education. We support public education with our mission to leverage partnership and provide resources for the districts that we work with. So a little bit, by the way, all the slides that we have here today, including all the research slides, will be posted on our website so you have access to them. Because I'm going to go through this quickly so we can get to the researchers. We do have an outstanding board. One of them will be on the panel with us today, John Miller. And a board really passionate about supporting education. It's a great mixture of corporate leaders and education leaders. We're very fortunate to have the president of the California State Board of Education on our board, former Secretary, U.S. Department of Education, and several business leaders, including John, who you will meet with this evening. Here we go. As Mohammed mentioned, our primary objective is to increase the number of students who are college and career ready. And we operationally define it as completing of the ADG requirements. Those are the UC, CSU, 15 mandatory course requirements of which you can't even apply unless you complete them. So that is where we're at. Our advocacy is we do work with school districts to adopt the A to G requirements as a default curriculum. Not as required, but as a default curriculum. We've worked with several districts in this area. We coordinate the Eastside Alliance. We've brought a network of 8 school districts serving 85,000 students over in the East Side, of which Chris is the superintendent. East Side, you'll meet him in just a little bit. Supporting Common Core professional development, computer science, and we also put on policy briefs and forums, as you see here today. As Mohammed mentioned, we have our direct service programs, our Elevate Math and Science programs, where we provide direct service to students to prepare them originally for grade 8 algebra, and now to prepare them for Common Core math and also accelerated math, either algebra or integrated high school course 1. And then, as you mentioned, our innovation, we're our High Hub and working with education technology. So this is the areas where we work on, advocacy programs and innovation. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. So I want to get to, these are our programs, and as I mentioned, these will be, you have slides, we'll go more details into the Elevate Math, Math Plus, and Science programs, and Deb, somewhere around here, has more information on that if you're interested. Again, targeting middle school. It's such a critical age. And you'll hear from Neil of how important it is, especially in terms of success in math. So our approach is basically a systemic approach that looks at 4 things. One is policy advocacy. Policy makes a difference. And that's our advocacy with adopting the ADG requirements as default. And we think it is an important policy decision that boards need to make. But students also need direct service. Oh. A different one? I press this one, right? Use this one. Okay, got it. I was told to press a different button. Direct service programs. Some students need additional time. They need extended time. It's students that fall behind. You know, we hear a lot about research that says, well, if students are not at grade level by 3rd grade, you know, they're going to be behind standards forever. But that assumes no intervention. It's not a death sentence if you happen to be below grade level by the time you reach 3rd grade. Significant intervention, extended time can make a difference. We also recognize the importance of educator professional development. We tie that into our Elevate programs. And then the issue of student access. This gets into the area of placement. We were very early on involved with the importance of equitable placement in critical gateway classes. And in 2010, the Eastside Alliance the districts there reached agreement on a common placement protocol for placing students in 8th grade algebra and 9th grade geometry. So that's sort of where we're coming from on that. Oh, that button didn't do any better. Here we go. Just going to touch on this very quickly because Louise is going to definitely address this. You know, we talk a lot about the Common Core. The Common Core does change a lot of things, but there's certain things that the Common Core doesn't change. The pathway to the four-year university system, the CSU and UC, is still through the A to G pathway. Now, inside that coursework, there's going to be significant shifts in instruction, but you cannot skip this pathway in order to just apply to the CSU and university system. And as you learn from Neil, it's not only completing the 3 years of math that's required, but the significant importance of completing that 4th year of math. So we mentioned one of our roles is to get information out there on critical research. We think that the two presenters that we have today will present to you information that have significant implications of how you can address both middle school and high school. So at this point, let me see if I can get the slides we're going. Oh, by the way, these slides here, I'm not going to go into detail on here, but this is, my colleague Bob put this together, two of my favorite data forms. This is the last set of data on the CST and the most recent A to G data for California and also for San Mateo County. And it's also disaggregated according to ethnicity. These two forms will be available on our website. You can access them, and you can see currently where we are. The A to G data is the most current, because that is still relevant. And then, of course, you'll see the last CST algebra data, which definitely predicts A to G completion rates down the line. We're in a major transition right now with Common Core, but this information will give you the latest for California and San Mateo County. So at this point, you know, one of the benefits of having this job is I've had to meet some really, truly outstanding people, and that normally I might not have met in my role as superintendent. And the person that I'm going to introduce now, Neil Finkelstein, we've had a strong partnership right on the onset with West Ed. They've helped us in so many different ways. They've conducted some research with us as well. And Neil has done, I think, some of the most important work on college-going pathways that, frankly, ought to be reviewed by everyone in the education field. So at this point, I would like to introduce Dr. Neil Finkelstein from West Ed. Neil?
Good afternoon. Wonderful to be here at GSV Labs and to talk with you for a little while this afternoon about course patterns and math and predicting the sequences of students. There is, no better example of being in a place like this where innovation is so important to understand the role that it just matters so much in our collective role of bringing students along and their families to encourage them to make their way through our school systems, through their higher education and career opportunities. There are so many wonderful ways to contribute, and we want to make sure that those opportunities are available to people. I'm going to get my name off the screen really quickly and move on to a discussion of college-bound in middle and high school. And I don't think that this will take very much convincing for the combination of my comments and my colleague Louise Jaffe to anchor home today that these ideas of getting ready for college just start so early. If I could ask that, I just want to do a sound check. Can you hear me okay? Loud enough, clear in the back? Everybody got it? Okay, thank you so much. If I could sort of set up what I'd like you to walk out of here today with, it's that we're not very good as educators, I include myself, in transmitting to all of the people who work in education systems the enormous consequence that early work in our schools has on the decision to attend and matriculate successfully into college. It's not the responsibility of high school teachers any more than it's the responsibility of middle school teachers, any more than it's the responsibility of elementary school teachers. And I think you'll see by the end of our afternoon that the communication of the enormous consequence of how this pathway works can be seen really in the early lives of children. It's not exactly what I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about today, but one of the things that we won't get into today, but of course you know is incredibly important, is financial aid. And we won't talk about that today. But if you think about the many things that affect families' decisions to help their kids along, with aspirations for higher education, which are seen across all groups by sociodemographic characteristics, financial aid is certainly something that signals to children relatively early in their lives whether they'll be able to go on this higher education journey or not. A journey which, of course, leads to the many opportunities in our economy. And of course, without the opportunities to attend higher education and have career-ready training, really does provide enormous challenges for students as they age up into the workforce. Map of the United States, just to get us off to a start. What I have here on the board, and you can't exactly see it, is what proportion of students in each of the different states in the United States make it through a bachelor's degree at the end of 6 years of bachelor's degree level education. If you take 100 students, take them from this area, and you watch them go through their 9th grade high school program and their 10th grade high school program and make it all the way through high school. And then you watch those 100 students and what's left of them in the pipeline. Some of them won't make it through high school, as you know. Watch them matriculate into higher education, and you don't give them 4 years to do a bachelor's degree, but you give them 6 years, what we describe as normative time. At the end of 10 years, how many of those 100 students would have earned a bachelor's degree? So the number for California is sort of in the range of 16 to 20%, and that's of course because the pipeline has trickles in and out of it at all different places along. We don't move as many students all the way through that pipeline as we'd like to. We lose students on the destiny of those 10 years relatively early on, and we lose them even in the higher education experience themselves, where we actually grant access to many students who don't complete that journey or don't complete the journey in baccalaureate granting institutions and move around. Well, this nagging problem of how we can be a state that matriculates 16 to 20% of our youth 10 years after they've entered the 9th grade has really been a constant source of my interest for many years now. And it wouldn't take very long to know that this 20% number didn't start by looking at the college experience. It must have started early. So for many years, I looked at what it is that allows students to get themselves into college. And of course, as Manny and Mohammed have said, the A to G pathway in California is what you need to stare at. And for those of us in the room, how many of you participated in an A to G pathway? How many of you were California bred and born and went through the A to G pipeline? Absolutely. It's not that tricky. It's very easy to understand. It's just a cascade of steps. If you're following in a very linear way, you're a 9th grader on the far left side of my chart, and you start in with one math course and one English course and one other requirement that meet the A to G requirements. Fantastic. With 3 courses completed in your 9th grade, you move on to be a sophomore in high school. The next column, in 10th grade, you double them up. Another course in math, another course in English. You add to the other A to G electives that are available, and by the time you finish 10th grade, you're at 2, 4, 7 courses, and you're on your way. By 11th grade, you triple them again. English again, another math course. You're up to Algebra 2. You've added a lab science in orange. Take on that foreign language requirement, history, social science, other A to G requirements. By the time you're a senior, you've finished the whole medley, you've finished the English courses, 3 math courses, 2 lab science courses, and on you go, you've met A to G. It doesn't happen like this. And it doesn't happen like this for enormous numbers of students. And A to G is a wonderful aspirational goal, and it is the default curriculum in so many of our districts in this area. But all over the state, there are students who really struggle with getting through this pipeline and certainly getting through it in this linear way. Let me dig in on it a little bit more. We're going to spend some time talking about math and where math enters into this area of not following that stair-step chart so well. And if following that cascade of steps looks like it was easy, let's look at these slides for just a second, and you'll see that that 9th grade problem is really the first place to start. Remember, I want to understand why there are few students who finish in California public higher education systems at the end of 10 years, and I need to look at the 9th grade math problem to see if I can find where that pipeline seems to let some students down. So this is a very simple set of charts, grade 9, grade 10, grade 11, grade 12. You can't see the numbers, but I'm going to take you through them. And all I've tried to do is ask a very simple question. On the slide before, I said, did you finish one course in math by the end of 9th grade? So what I've done is I've drawn a little red mark at the number that corresponds to 1. And I want to know what percentage of students did make it and what percentage didn't. So all I need to do is add to the left bars that represent, in this case, 31% of the students who didn't complete any math as 9th graders and 11% who only completed half a unit, and 42% of my students didn't make it up the first step as 9th graders. So I already know of my 100 students where I was looking for their path over 10 years, I already know where 42 of them are. They were having trouble in math as 9th graders. Well, you can take it to 10th grade. Let's see what else happened. So far, I've accounted for 42. If I take all the students who couldn't get through the second math course in 10th grade on their way to that nice gradual A to G progression pattern, how many by 10th grade were off track? 16 and 7 is 23, 23 and 19, 33, 16 and 7 is 23, 33, 42%, 42, 52, 53% when I'm adding the bars to the left who didn't make it to 2 full units earned in 10th grade in math. It becomes easier and easier to see why it's hard to be one of the students making it through that 10-year journey to earn a baccalaureate degree if you're having trouble in math as a freshman and sophomore. We can do it again for 11th grade. It continues to build. You get the point. There's a pipeline problem that we want to solve. And then I met Manny Barbera somewhere along the line, and Manny and I became fast friends on this issue of what can we do in middle grades, because of course if 9th grade is the problem that we're seeing, you don't arrive in 9th grade with difficulties and challenges in getting through math. It must be sooner. And I'm a researcher, and I go around the world looking for great data sets to work on and for patterns that we can find inference with. And the Silicon Valley partnership with WestEd and the Regional Educational Laboratory has been just an amazing place to do very practical and grounded research in a way that we hope helps these systems and helps us learn to be able to distribute this information more broadly. I do want to acknowledge Chris Funk and his team at Eastside, who've just been the most wonderful colleagues to work with in allowing us to do some of this research. I titled this slide Findings from Earlier Work because we're going to end up talking about the Common Core, whether we like it or not this afternoon. That is the circumstance under which we find ourselves right now. But of course, many of the things that we've done over recent years are in a world that precedes the implementation of the Common Core. And so from my perspective, I just want to be truthful in the sense that we have patterns that we understand in math trajectories, and at the same time, many of these things are changing quite rapidly as school systems and school districts are changing the course structures, changing the instruction itself, and working on different pacing. So let me take you through a few slides of what we know, and we'll talk at the end of my comments about what the implications are under the Common Core. We think two things are true. If you're strong in grade 7 math, everything we know about math trajectories says you're going to continue to be strong throughout high school in math. There's every reason in the world to help our students who are doing well in math, enjoy math, are being well instructed in math, are reaching their goals in math to continue to be pushed and help them with that trajectory in math. There's nothing that we can see in the research that would decrease our enthusiasm for giving some students fast and furious journey through math. They seem to do very well. But another thing is true. Students who hadn't done well in math continue not to do well in math. I'm off one on my slides. This is the most incredible gadget. It's so sensitive. Let's see if I can find this. So I'm going to try and go back. I don't know if that'll work. What we find is that students who had done well early on continue to do well later on, and that's what this slide says. the majority of students who were proficient in their math tests who took Algebra 1 in grade 8, they continue to do well. However, the accelerated path doesn't work for all the students in grade 7. There are many students in 7th grade who didn't do math, which leads us to the next slide. For students who hadn't done particularly well in math early on, they really continue to struggle. And struggling in math in most of our school systems results in repeating courses. And repeating courses is something that's become a little pet peeve of mine, that we ought to think really hard about why and under what circumstances we ask students to repeat things. It's not likely if you do something again that didn't go well the first time that'll particularly have a different outcome. And it's incredibly cost ineffective to repeat courses in ways that we think won't help students. We've done quite a lot of work on the repeating of courses in math in this area around the state. We've done it in other places around the country. And we know that repeating helps some students in some very, very specific cases, but in general, repeating math hasn't worked very well. We see that students who have repeated continue to struggle. So here's an example just to sort of verify what's going on here. This simply says in a picture what I've said in words, which is that we looked at how students were doing in 7th grade, which is the grades they earned. They were doing bad in math, they were doing very well in math, and we look at what they were enrolled in as 9th graders. And this simply demonstrates that the better you were doing in math as an early student, as a 7th grader, as a 13-year-old, the chances of being in these green courses were higher. That's being in geometry as a 9th grader, and certainly some being in algebra as well. But if you hadn't been doing well in math, the chances are much, much lower that you would have been in that geometry course later on. So this is simply saying the better you've done before is consistent with the better you'll do later. Okay, so one more point, just to make sure that you're absolutely convinced of this pattern. We look at how students continue to progress over time, and we want to know whether, in fact, more time studying the same things makes them better at math. And if I could just ask you to focus on the navy blue line on top, I have this curve with a really, really unfortunate pattern, which is that it flattens out. If I could have taken all the students in 8th grade who were doing really well in math, I would have drawn a curve that would have said, hey, a quarter of my 8th graders are fluent in algebra when they come out of 8th grade. And that number would have continued to pitch up at a 45-degree rate right to that light fixture. By every year that students continued to take math, we would have found that they were continuing to become proficient in algebra. But it's not the case. This chart demonstrates that when we asked students to take math as an 8th grader, in this case algebra, which was somewhat accelerated, move them to 9th grade to have tried it again, we only get a 7 percentage point change in the number of students who are proficient, and it flattens out. Students who had struggled, some got better, and not many more increased, and not many more increased. And that's a table effect on the chart, which means that there are diminishing returns to this pattern of repeating algebra, and that's too bad. But what it signals more than anything is that the students who don't seem to make progress year over year in trying to reach these algebra goals are missing strong foundations in math. They're struggling with things that make it hard for them to do the basics that really are required in algebra and more advanced mathematics. And some of these patterns I've summarized just briefly. I want to point out a couple of them. We think in our data around the state about 1/3 of students were repeating Algebra 1 for a while earlier, 2005 to 2010. We think that high school students, 1/3 of them don't take math as 12th graders. We think that somebody who ever took a repeated course in Algebra 1 and Geometry, Algebra 2, up very, very close to 50%, 49.7%. So we have these patterns in our data that show that students are demonstrating that they're struggling along the way and they don't have very, very many occasions to get off those pathways and get the kind of support that they need. Okay, we're going to move on just a little bit. I want to take you through kind of 2 more things. One is the senior year of high school, because it seems like now I'm jumping from this idea that students aren't well prepared early on, and yet there's this pressure, this enormous pressure that we get them through a math program where they're really able to reach proficiency all the way through high school, and yet we've got this early support problem, and we've got these at the same time. So here's the question: what's the course objective for the senior year of high school? And I don't want to ask this question to juniors in high school. I want to ask this question of parents of 11-year-olds. I want the question, what is the course objective for the senior year of high school, to be asked at the earliest age it possibly can be, as soon as we have some signal as to whether or not students are doing well or struggling. And it simply reinforces the point that I've made, that math matters so much in elementary school, and we start seeing evidence of the challenges of foundations and pre-algebraic work as soon as they're leaving elementary school and moving on into those early middle grades. Look at one more chart very quickly. Simply making the point that things are cumulative. There's a bar chart in here. Let's see if it comes up. There it is. Look at these things that students struggle with. The ability to know and handle integers, the ability to manipulate fractions, the ability to work on decimal notation, to work on exponents, to work on literal symbols and handle equations, geometric measurement, data analysis, and proportionality. This is an example of a chart from a diagnostic test that we use very frequently, and in fact is used a lot in Silicon Valley, where we're simply showing that students are in this range of sort of kind of doing okay, but we think that in order to demonstrate mastery at any of these levels in any of these areas, you've really got to be much better at it. And students in the 70 to 80% range would simply have a much better likelihood of passing through some of these areas. And these kind of on average lower range scores that we frequently see in our school districts is an indication that can be seen in diagnostic testing at the 7th grade that there are problems. So again, I'm going back to this point, what's the 12th grade course that students should take if we know in 6th and 7th grade of the challenges that students are having here? It's about course sequencing. It's about how and under what circumstances to accelerate students and how and under what circumstances to give students more support. As Manny and Mohammed explained, we have the opportunity within Silicon Valley to offer the Elevate program, thanks Bob, that gives students some additional support during the summer to reinforce basic concepts in algebra when they're 12 and 13 years old. We think that there's ever more reason to stare hard at the many kind of supplemental programs that can be provided for students as they're making their way through middle school. And we think that it gets right into this question about how and under what circumstances should courses be offered that help students as they're making their way through those middle grade paths. Now there's an obvious kind of convergence of issues here. We want students to take math all the way through high school. We think that some students will do well if they get an early start. We know some students will struggle if they get an early start too early, and we know that there's support that's needed, and all these messy judgments need to happen in the school setting, and that's the work that we all do to try and make those shades more clear and clean and help students and replace them and support them in ways that are much more customized, I think, than we ever have. One of the solutions are these ideas of compacted sequences to try and move students through math in components of work that happen perhaps in a more efficient way than have been previously taught. They can be modularized, they can be compacted, they can be done during the school year, they can be done after school, they can be during the summer. There are all sorts of ways that we're looking at organizing courses to do this. But of course, the Common Core is now upon us, and the Common Core does something very purposeful that we didn't have under the existing state standards in math. It works very deliberately to recycle concepts in mathematics learning that go around and back and loop through and back again over and over and over again in a cascade of sort of instructional depth. And I think that under many of the things that we're seeing in the instructional changes under the Common Core, we're maybe getting rid of the need to do some of this sort of differentiated instruction in the way that we had seen it in advance of the implementation of the Common Core. The point is that we have these sequencing issues that need to be figured out, and the Common Core is one way of trying to mitigate some of the differentiation that we've seen in the past. I put up these slides to close out my comments by, again, reinforcing that it's the consequences of making these decisions in middle grades that are so important. And we're going to get to this place where A to G means moving yourself all the way through this math sequence and being good at math all the way through high school. And the one thing that students don't do with enough sort of fortitude is understand that math all the way through high school really matters. I think in this room we'd probably agree that calculus for many students matters in high school, and certainly to be able to get into the UC system, calculus as a senior at high school isn't required, it's certainly encouraged. In the CSU system, also not required, but ever more encouraged. But there's a more fundamental point. If you skip math as a senior in high school, you're rusty when you go into a college level course and start again. If you skip math in high school and show up on one of the community college campuses in our state, which many of our students do, among the things that happens relatively soon on is you're asked to take a placement test to see how you've done in math. And if you haven't taken math as a senior, you're rusty. So I wanted to just sort of end by saying, think about this whole trajectory from the image of what's the 12th year course as seen from the perspective of the 6th grade student. You can compact in middle school through an acceleration of some part, 6th grade math in 6th grade, move around parts of 6th, 7th, and 8th grade in 7th grade, other parts of 8th grade and algebra in 9th grade, and so on, all the way to calculus. It's a scenario that says that you can make it from being 11 years old and 12 years old to being 17 years old, and you can find a way to get to calculus under a pattern of courses. And you'll see down here that I put this box called an acceleration decision point. That might be a cue to you that some people will want to work hard on differentiating those students who can go a little faster earlier on. In this case, I put this decision point at the end of 6th grade, acknowledging that some students do well early. But the point is that I'm going to show you really quickly that in a matter of seconds, let's see, I think I'm just out of range, that you can change it to a different picture and have traditional courses in 6th, 7th, 8th grade, algebra through high school, algebra 2, pre-calculus, calculus, and move the decision to accelerate later at the end of 8th grade. Or you can have an accelerated integrated pathway, which is what some of the districts in Silicon Valley have done by moving around the course structures in the 9th and 10th grade and accelerating after middle school to get to calculus as a senior. Or you can have an enhanced pathway where plus standards are applied later in the high school experience. Or you can work during the summer and figure out a way to take the additional material later in the summer. It's not so much to say that there's one right or one wrong, but it's to reinforce for you this afternoon that the continuity of math instruction through the high school program presumes that students are strong when they're coming out of middle school in math. And the decision to move kids more quickly or more slowly with more support or less support is a decision that should be made in middle grades. It's in that sense that the preparation for college is a middle school math problem. And that's the point that we'd like to reinforce this afternoon. We really need to focus this attention on middle school math. It's not the only thing we need to focus on. For all my colleagues who work on English language arts, they would make the same sorts of points about reading fluency among adolescents and tell us and help us to understand the enormous urgency to make sure that students are fluent, good readers of critical text at an early age. But for today, if you could leave with this idea that math matters in middle school, and it's incredibly consequential for the college matriculation decision, and we've got to be very careful as we implement the Common Core to make sure that those foundations in math are so strong to guarantee the 4-year sequence of math instruction for students on their way to those higher education goals. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Neil. So it's great stuff. The slides will be posted, and you can also get a copy of the research, I think, from West Ed, right? So you can actually get that. So our next researcher, about 1.5 years ago, I ran across a publication called Mathematics from High School to Community College, Using Existing Tools to Increase College Readiness Now. And I thought, what's kind of interesting? So I read it. And I said, this is really good stuff. It's very much aligned to what Neil just shared. So I contacted David. It's from PACE. You You can find it on if you Google Louise Jaffe and Pace, you'll find it. So I contacted David Plank from Pace. I go, hey, can you connect me with the person who wrote the paper? And connected me with Louise. We had some email exchange, and I said, at some point we're going to have a forum on this. I'd like you to come and present. So at this point, I'm delighted to, and you have the bios and all these people, so I won't take a lot of time on that, to present to you Louise Jaffe, who will present to you some of her key points that she found in her research. So please welcome Louise.
Thank you. Okay, so you're going to hear a lot of corroborating evidence. So let's see, where am I? Point here, right? Okay, so I'm a community college trustee, and I've been just stunned by the number of students who are coming into community college, taking this placement assessment and scoring below college level. And just to give you a sense, last year, 74% of California's students who were in college were in community college. 74% of our college students are in community college. 52% of CSU graduates started in community college, and 31% of UC graduates started in community college. So this is an issue. Whoops, wow, that is sensitive. Okay, it's haunted now. So I wanted to know what's going on. Oh, darn, I'm sorry. Slow learner here, let's see if I can get this. And, okay, it's not animating, good. All right, we'll get this, oh my goodness. And the colors are off, everything's wrong here now. Let me see if I can get back to where. So obviously you know about math. I looked at math as just as a lens to view articulation between middle school to high school and high school to college. But also math is a huge roadblock. You cannot get a bachelor's degree from a CSU or a UC without passing above Algebra 2 college level math. Whether you want to be an art history major or dance or whatever it is, you've got to get through those math requirements. So when we're talking about how important math is, it's a gateway that opens maybe for STEM people, but it's really smashing a lot of people's dreams. Okay, so I looked at math pathways, and Neil has also done a lot of work very similar to this, which I thought he was going to talk about, so I'm skipping most of it. But wow. So, sorry. So I looked at math pathways for high school and with 3 markers. So the first marker was 9th grade, where did students start? Then I wanted to know, when did they stop? Did they take math in 12th grade? And where did they stop? What's the highest level math they took? And I was looking at that particularly in terms of Algebra 2, which of course is the A through G requirement for UC and CSU. Remember, that's a minimum eligibility requirement. That is not necessarily meaning you're college ready. That only means you can apply or you're eligible. And I was very interested and modeled my research on this research by Clifford Edelman, where he found that every course beyond Algebra 2 doubles the odds of college completion. And that was one thing he found in a larger scenario, which I think speaks very much to A through G, which was he looked at students who had reached completed baccalaureate degrees in national sample, and found that what was the greatest predictor of students being able to complete a baccalaureate degree was academic intensity in high school. Academic intensity, and part of that for math. This is a slide that shows you virtually nothing now, but basically I had 3,000 students in my sample, and about 1/3 of them went on to community college, so you know. And I looked at these math pathways defined by grade 9, grade 12, and the highest level math, both for all students and freshmen. And I was pretty surprised, and Neil can corroborate this, to see that our students are not doing one thing. They are all over the place. However many options we've got, they're taking them. They are traveling different pathways through high school math. And I think there's some important takeaways from this, and that is this educational pipeline metaphor really does not fit. Even in high school, starting in 9th grade, there's no single entry point. There's certainly no common exit point. Students are taking math for a different duration of time. They're taking different coursework. They have different content mastery. But I think maybe the most important point is the last one. It is not a passive process. Students are making decisions. Their counselors are making decisions. The schools are making decisions. The decisions are very consequential. And we don't seem to be real, obviously you all are thinking about it, but in general, we think we sort of have this pipeline and you're in and there you go, and no. We've been there. Oh, darn it. Okay, so back to this, the thing, if you're going to middle school or high school and you're wondering what math should I take, given these low math high school graduation requirements that Manny mentioned, the point I want to make here is every one of these pathways is fine. All of these lead to high school graduation. Almost all of them meet A through G requirements, right? So these students, here are the highest group for community college students. They took no math in grade 12. They made it to Algebra 2. They're A through G ready. But the issue is that getting a high school diploma is really not what we need to be thinking about. The goalposts have moved for our students. Every student, I keep hearing people don't need to go to college or they don't want to go to college. It's not true in the economy that we live in. Everyone needs some post-secondary education. So we need to be thinking not about what does it take to get that high school diploma. We need to be looking beyond high school. And so the question I asked in my research was, how do the different high school math pathways prepare students for community college? And as Neil mentioned, when students come to community college, that's 74% of our college students, plus all those others who then transferred, they take this assessment test. And these assessment tests are not currently consistent across the state. And they place into college level or 1, 2, 3, or 4 levels. And this is all middle school math, right? So what happens? Placement in developmental math, that's any of those levels below, is one of the single greatest barriers to college completion. The likelihood of completing the developmental math sequence depends on where you start. So if you placed in, that's supposed to be blue, intermediate algebra, 70% of the students who place there, this is statewide community college data, complete. If you place 2 levels below into Algebra 1, only 35% finished the sequence, were ready to take college level math. If you place 3 levels below into pre-algebra, we're talking about 1 out of 5 students making it through that sequence to be able to take a college level math course. And students who placed into basic arithmetic, 11%. That's like 1 out of 10. Like most of you can just get up and leave right now. You're not even going to make it through the remedial sequence to begin to take a college level course. So this is not a good story. This is just to show you sort of how, this was my sample. This is statewide data. So 85% of the students in the state placed into one of those levels of remediation, with 65% placing in Algebra 1, pre-algebra, or basic arithmetic. And this is a slide, this is my smaller sample, but it's showing you that Black and Latino, higher percentages of Black and Latino students were placing much lower. It's not that no one's placing at college level, they are, but far too many students are placing in these lower levels. So, what predicts placing into college level or below college on this assessment? And to answer this question, I did a multinomial logistic regression, and that means I poured a whole bunch of variables into my computer, and it decided which ones were going to make a difference. And to do that, first I had to look at all the variables I had and decide which ones I wanted to use. And I was very surprised to see that the Casey math score, 10th grade California high school exit exam math score, had the highest correlation to the college placement assessment. Now, what's the 10th grade Casey measure? 7th and 8th grade math. The Casey is mostly 7th grade math, and to pass it, you get 55% of it right, and you passed. And the second highest correlation was for the 7th grade CST. So I was stunned. Not for 11th grade, not for highest level math, not for math GPA. The 7th grade CST math was the highest correlated. And then I looked, I said, well, does that mean students are forgetting? And the correlation between the 7th grade CST and the Casey, and I realize, 3 years from now we may not know what any of these tests are, but they still have something we can learn from now, 0.812. That's a very, very high, strong correlation. So I think what that means is it's not that the 10th graders forgot everything they had learned in 7th grade, it's that they never learned it. And the slides that Neil showed with that, looking at that different fractions, decimals, whatever, that, that weak mastery demonstrates that. Okay, so then I did, these are the variables that I used in my model. So I used the demographic variables, I used these math pathway markers, I used GPA, and I used the Casey math. And a number of them were significant, but the one I want to talk about is the Casey math because it relates to middle school math. So the Casey math was a significant predictor at all levels below. This chart is telling you basically that with all those other variables being the same, students were about 23% more likely to place into one of these remedial levels than into college level math. So I think, oh, okay, duh, what's that mean? So here I'm looking at, I'm sorry, these slides are messed up. They're supposed to animate, so you can only look at one at a time, but. So here I want to look at the Casey scores with the placement in college. So this first column are students who failed the Casey. They got less than a 350, and almost all of them, there's actually a little green sliver that got lost, but 97% of them placed into pre-algebra or basic arithmetic. And that's not really a surprise, right? Because they failed the Casey, which is assessing 7th grade math. And when you have students, in high schools have students who fail the Casey, it's all hands on deck. Everyone knows that's a serious issue because they're not going to be able to get that high school diploma, right? But look at this next column. This column is students who passed. They got from 370 to 379. They got a letter, perhaps from some of you, saying, congratulations, you passed the California high school exit exam. They think they're done. They think that means they're ready. But look what happened when 2 years later they took this test. Almost 80% of them placed into pre-algebra or basic arithmetic. Now, if they had done a little bit better and they're proficient on the Casey, we have much, much better outcomes. 39% now are college ready, and only 23% placed into that very low chance of completing. And students who were advanced were really basically good to go if they had that really solid, those skills. So I was blown away when I saw this. I actually stopped my dissertation. I said, oh, this is enough. Let's get this out. I finished the dissertation, but there was a whole lot of other questions I was going to move on to. And I went and talked to a friend of mine who was a high school teacher, and I said, look at this. Oh, my dear, 5 minutes. And he said that. Why do I care? I said, what do you mean? He said, well, the API doesn't give me any credit other than if a student passes. So that's where I made this recommendation about we should reward growth in students who are proficient and advanced. And you don't have to wait for the state or the API to do that. You can begin doing that in your schools right now. You can say, okay, this is important. So let me race through. So middle school math matters. You can utilize these assessments or whatever assessments to identify students who are on track to unreadiness and intervene for them. It's mission critical. It's an ongoing priority, and if students are making it into high school and they don't have these skills, then we have to change what high schools are doing because they're not really going anywhere. Does it matter much? This is statewide data. 1 out of 4 students in the state are in this basic, in this past, but weren't proficient. So that's over 100,000 students every year. For Black and Latino students, it's about a third. Just tell me when I've run out. So I think that we need longitudinal data. We can't just be looking at high school or middle school. We got to be looking at how does this affect, it's to Neil's point really of what's 12th grade about. I think 12th grade is a launch pad. It should be a hybrid year. So these were the second recommendations. In a data set I have looking at a third of the students, 44%, it's a higher number than Neil had, 44% of the students in the state took no math at all in 12th grade, 44%. 42% were in Algebra 2 or above in 11th grade, but then only 2/3 of them took math in 12th grade. So don't waste senior year. But the question is not just don't waste it, it's what should we be doing with it? And we need to do different things for different students. So for some students, I think you need to develop remedial coursework. For other students, we should have some bridge curriculum. And for students who are being successful, they should continue to keep taking it. And this little point, I think, is a big point, which is you're in the Bay Area, you've got 10 community colleges around here and CSUs. And these schools have resources, and students could begin taking some of these classes and work in a dual enrollment so that they begin to see themselves as college students, and they're not just taking the same thing over again in the same way where we know they're not successful. Am I out now of time? I think so. So I think you have to balance the benefits. Actually, I want to go to this one. I think we'd be better off if we imagined hiking trails, where students begin at different trailheads. They hike different trails, but they may end at the same destination, or they may hike same trails and end at different destinations. Some of our students are going to go off trail. That's the way people are. But none of the institutional trails should be leading to dead ends. And this needs to be said. This assessment system and placement system there's a lot of research indicating that it's underplacing a lot of students who could be more successful if we place them differently. And there is a common assessment initiative looking at multiple measures. And the multiple measures we're looking at are high school transcript data. What did they take? Do they have academic intensity? And a very important factor coming out is cumulative GPA. And that's it, and I'm sorry. Thanks. Segues well, though, right?
Thank you, Louise. So now we're going to get into I'm going to ask our panelists to please come on up, and I will introduce you. While the panelists are coming up, I want to acknowledge someone. So when we first started the A to G work, the first district that we started, first of all, San Jose Unified, we have 2 board members here, was the first district out of the chute under Linda Murray's leadership when she was superintendent to adopt A to G. And that was, gosh, my kids all went through San Jose Unified, I want to say 2000, it's been a long time. So I want to acknowledge San Jose Unified, but we began to work with Eastside Union High School District, and the superintendent there, it was my pleasure to begin working with him, was Dan Moser, who's now one of my colleagues. I want to acknowledge Dan. And then after Dan retired, I was really nervous thinking who is going to be the next superintendent. And I'll tell you what, not my number 1 pick was Chris Funk, who is the current superintendent of Eastside, who continued that work. You were the number 1. You know that. You were number 1. So I was delighted to have that kind of transition. So let me introduce, first of all, there's John. Our moderator, John Fensterwall. I had the pleasure of meeting John when he worked at the foundation, and he developed Thoughts on Public Education, Top Ed. We had a chance to work together. I think he's the foremost education writer in the state. He always knows what's going on. So please welcome John Fensterwald, who's going to be moderating the panel today. And then we have John Miller, who's on our board. He's not just passionate about education, he puts his money into it too. So he supports financially the A to G advocacy. So John Miller from DJM Capital. Jim Hollis, I had a chance to actually run into when I was superintendent, and he was working with Pivot Learning Partners. I was on their board. And Jim now is advocate from the Calculus Roundtable and advocating for students of color to complete calculus. And I think what he has to say is going to be really important. So, Jim, thank you for joining us today. Chris Funk, who is the superintendent of the Eastside Union High School District and one of the co-chairs for the Eastside Alliance, is with us here today. Chris? And you've already met Brian Simmons, who welcomed you on behalf of the San Mateo County Office of Education. And this is not Rebecca Burciaga. So you're wondering, wait a minute, in case you happen to know the two. So the other night, Rebecca sent me an email and says, Manny, I hate to do this, but I am getting an award from San Jose State at the exact time as this forum. Obviously, what am I going to tell her? Don't get your award, right? So, so I was thinking, who do I know that can step in? So I contacted Bettina Lopez. Bettina is a high school principal and is going to be the new executive director for Latino College Prep. And I'm so glad she's able to do that on such short notice. So thank you, Bettina. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to John, and we'll start the panel discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Manny. So much expertise, so many questions, so little time. So first I wanted to give some of you a little bit of time to explain your expertise. So Jim, tell us what the Calculus Roundtable is and why you started it, and a little bit of data on students of color and calculus completion, if you will.
Thank you.
Is that on?
Hello? Hello? Okay. Thank you. Calculus Roundtable is an organization that works with school districts and county offices of ed to open pathways to math and science skills for children of color primarily. We work with San Mateo and Santa Clara County doing data normalization at the administration level, because we believe that, and we also create supplemental classes, but without a connection to the support system to support those classes, they will die on the vine. So we really believe that it takes not only rigor and importance in the instruction, but also in working with the administration to support 21st century learners. So we're really focused on helping build institutions that support 21st century learning. We also work with the San Jose Public Library. We're building a teen digital learning center there, 4,400 square feet in the mezzanine level. We work with students to do that in a cohort that are sort of on the CTE program level to build an architecture program. So they are helping to design the space at the library. So that is what we do for a living. I think working with Pivot, if any of you know Pivot or back in the BASRAC days, we worked mostly with doing systemic school reform. And I saw a lot of programs that were very, very promising, and those that weren't promising both die because of lack of support, lack of longitudinal data to support whether programs were happening well. So the data is really important as part of the journey. I think one of the data points that we saw that sort of created the name of the Calculus Roundtable, even though we do a lot more than working with calculus, because as we just say here from the data, it starts very early on, is a data point we saw that in the 9 counties in the Bay Area, this was, I guess, 2012 data, but in the 9 counties of the Bay Area, there were less than 100 African Americans enrolled in calculus. So we thought as an organization, boy, if we can get 10 more people, we've made a big dent in what's going on. So part of it is trying to look at that as a bellwether to how well the system is doing in supporting students. We actually think that we start looking at 6th grade and 6th to 9th grade, how to motivate students to work on math together in team efforts. Early middle school boys and girls are very interested in impressing each other, way more than they're impressing their parents or teachers. So we try to build activities that support a trajectory to calculus that begin at 6th grade and build teams of students that are working together on problems. So we think that's a great effort to do.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Jim. So, John, please remind us why we're here from your perspective as a CEO. You know, you supported the A to G, adoption of A to G as a default curriculum, and so why is A to G important to you?
Well, to me, it's pretty basic. As I walk to work out in downtown San Jose, I walk through St. James Park. I've actually, a number of people in the foundation know that I reference this point all the time, where, you know, if you think education's expensive, try ignorance. Taking that from the Harvard president, but walking to work out through St. James Park, I'm just confronted with a massive homeless population, and also just a population that, in my opinion, really doesn't reflect fundamentally our culture as a community, or as a state, or as a country, when we're deficient in our ability to educate our kids. So I have just taken it upon myself to become actively involved as a owner of a private company, as a constituent business interest in downtown San Jose. I find that it's incumbent upon a lot of people like myself to get involved in the process in any way that they can. And one of my biggest focus with the foundation is through the A to G, is the advocacy that goes along with getting the A to G adopted in the 11 high school districts in Santa Clara County. So I'm actually working with Manny on that initiative, devoting my time and resources as best I can, because I just think that it's so incredibly important, whether it's for career readiness, or whether it's to go to Berkeley or UCLA, or go to San Jose State. The requirement, the prerequisite, is to have our students achieve it at a level that allows them to compete. And so that's why I am continue, and I will have a long role here as I get older and do more, to see that this A to G adoption in Santa Clara County, along with other initiatives that the foundation have, become more embraced within our own Santa Clara County network of schools, but also here, potentially here in San Mateo County. So I think it's so critically important, which is why I'm here.
Thanks. So a reminder that if you do have questions, Bob Nichols is taking them, and we'll get to them hopefully in a while. So Chris, you were assistant superintendent of a unified district, San Jose, and now you're superintendent of a high school district. And so I'm wondering about the articulation issues between your middle schools, and it must complicate things. I know the foundation is working to coordinate, but what did you hear today from Neil and Louise that would inform the articulation issues between your middle school and high schools?
So Eastside Union High School District has 7 feeder districts that obviously has 7 superintendents, 7 board of trustees, and that creates some barriers for that alignment. But the work that's been done recently has truly been amazing in terms of coming up with common agreement on math placement. The last 2 years, we spent a lot of time on supporting our math teachers from 6th through 11th grade on the implementation of the Common Core math, particularly because we've moved to the integrated approach at the secondary level. But the other challenge that I think is very clear is, particularly for middle school, for parents, is the acceleration piece. Because in the old system, with the traditional sequence of algebra, geometry, algebra 2, students could accelerate in 7th grade, taking Algebra 1, Geometry in 8th grade, and begin their high school career in Algebra 2. The problem with that sequence, though, is even at the high school level, after Calculus BC, there's no other math to take unless you leave and go to the community college or the university. So that is very few individuals that reach that level. So we've had to make sure with the implementation of the Common Core that we have that acceleration in place in the Eastside Alliance. That allows for the acceleration to take place. So beginning next year in all of our middle schools that feed into the high school, our integrated course 1 math, high school math, will be taught in 8th grade for those that are ready for that acceleration. And that allows for the sequence to take Calculus BC their senior year. The other point that I just want to touch on, I know we're focusing on middle school math, and I think that's critical, but I think the piece of the conversation that most people forget, and coming from a K-12 system, is at least when you look at the CST system, assessment system, where kids really start to fail off in math is in that 4th grade, 4th and 5th grade. And the reason for that is we expect our elementary school teachers with multiple subjects to be experts in 6 different subject areas. And it's not until middle school, and particularly 7th and 8th grade, when they have their single subject in math. So to me, it's not, the conversation doesn't begin in sixth grade. It begins changing the system in the elementary level, particularly in fourth and fifth grade, because the math, the data is very clear the last 15 years. The drop off from third to fourth, fourth to fifth in math, that's where it begins.
Good. Well, while we're talking with someone who's had experience with both requiring A to G in San Jose Unified and now have a default approach in Eastside Union. So perhaps maybe you want to take a second and explain the difference and what impact that's had on your students. Do you have a preference? And in light of that, let me turn to one of our first questions, who points out appropriately that we've all heard recently that LA Unified is in the news, talking about the difficulty of A to G. They required it in 2017, I believe, and the latest news was only 22%, I believe, are on track to do that, to make it in 17. And so, if carried out to its logical consequence, there will be very few graduates in LA Unified. So the question is, how do we thread this needle? And perhaps any of you want to talk about it, but Chris, maybe you want to talk about the difference between a default and a required A to G and what difference that makes.
So in San Jose Unified, the A through G is the required graduation requirement, meaning that every single student will take the minimum 15 sequential courses. The difference, though, is you have to have a C or better for you to be eligible for the UC-CSU, but for the high school, you can earn a D and still earn your diploma. Whereas in LA Unified now, in 2016, I believe, they will no longer offer Ds. It's either a C or an F or C or higher. And that will then plummet their graduation rate, or it will definitely lower the rigor in terms of their grading. Whereas in San Jose Unified, you do not see a drop in dropout rate when they move to the A through G as the graduation requirement. In Eastside, it's a default curriculum. So we're moving so that every course that's being offered is aligned to A through G, but we do not require the 3 years of math, 4 years, 3 years of science in that. So that's the difference.
And any impact in terms of your rate of A to G completion?
Our A through G completion is on the uprise. In the last 4 years. It's gone up just over 5%. So overall as a district, and if you take out the charter schools, we're actually at 43.4%. With charter schools, we're at 42.2%. So our charter schools actually hurt us in that range. But so we have a lot of work to do, obviously.
Yeah. I guess they won't in a couple of years, will they, Bettina? So Brian, what role does the county office have in supporting districts in helping them be college ready, and how is the county involved in supporting networks, the district networks that are happening with regard to A to G?
So the county office, obviously, we have our own students. So we have students who, unfortunately, more often than not, are the students who didn't do so well in our districts. And so we sort of see it on the other side as well, which is supporting students who've had this misaligned course sequence, not done well in those classes. And many of them have been expelled from their schools for all kinds of reasons, and I think, and some of them for credit deficiencies. And so I think, our office sees the unintended or intended consequences of some of these policies at play. But meanwhile, we also obviously have a curriculum instruction and an oversight role at the county office. And so in this county, with the support of the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, there's been the creation of 3 different networks of districts to try and get some of this normalization of expectations and course sequence. So the North County, the 4 districts that feed into the Jefferson Union High School district in Daly City, they have been working for the last 2 years on a similar project to Oak Grove in some ways, the Eastside Alliance, in trying to both create some standards across the districts around what the course expectations are, as well as, I think as important as all of the sort of policy and course structure is what actually goes on in classrooms every day, and that I think what we're all running up against, and that this North County Collaborative is really trying to work on, as is the South County. We have one in the South County as well as the Unified School Districts, but they're really trying to norm instructional practice. And really invest in a common approach to teaching and learning mathematics, that what much of, I think, the data is showing isn't just that students are or aren't getting access to courses, they're not actually being successful within those courses because it's really hard to teach kids of heterogeneous backgrounds the kind of content that we're asking, the kind of college and career readiness content that we're trying to teach them. So these networks are really digging in to, one of the networks is really invested in the formative assessment lesson process with the math, the MARS assessments through the Silicon Valley Math Initiative to help teachers pay attention much earlier in the process of instructing students in math. That obviously early intervention matters most within a classroom, and so our office has been helping districts to both implement that work, be partners alongside them, and now most recently been doing some work around helping them to learn from this experience as they work across districts to try to implement what is a very complex set of curriculum and new instructional tasks. So I think it would be nice if this was if what happened in classrooms was simply was already taken care of and we just needed to make sure we got kids into those classrooms. But the reality is that classroom instruction is changing radically, and how we help. We've sort of changed the expectations, and we're changing how teachers should be teaching. It's a lot to change at the same time. So I think that's something that our office is really taking on. The last thing I would just say quickly is that we've been working at the very other end of the spectrum with a project called the Early Learning Math Initiative in the Redwood City School District, right in this community, to help pre-K and early K2 teachers learn about math concepts as well as begin to implement rigorous math instruction in the early grades, because it really does start there.
So, Bettina, based on your experience, what have you found can be done and what needs to be done to increase the college-going rates for Latinos?
For Latino students, I think there's no surprise that Latino students in great numbers are not being successful in classrooms across the state and across the nation. But at the same time, I do want to point out that the research that we just saw also included the fact that any students, especially in California, that are moving on to a community college or college are underperforming at really high rates. So what I would say is that the first issue is the fluency of the language of academics is enormous for all our students in California. So how do we support teachers and in targeting that type of vocabulary and instruction in the classroom? The other thing is exactly what I've heard spoken to today, which is if our students are not succeeding in repeating courses, and we know that in large numbers, then we need to focus on being able to maximize their success during a school day. Because the intervention courses after school solely are not going to create the gains that we need. Additionally, the students aren't passing in those repeater courses. So I'm glad to hear that there's a push for options in what's offered in a school day for students and allowing students to take different trails or pathways. So I think for any type of student, that is extremely important. And the component that this foundation does support is every time that there are direct programs to high schools, whether it's in the summer or during the school day, that there is a component to allow for professional development of staff, which is crucial.
So I know that there are a number of folks who have great hopes in Common Core will, particularly its emphasis in the earlier grades, perhaps lead to higher achievement later. But one of the things that with Common Core math, Bettina, is requirement of fluency and the ability to explain your answers, and creates a whole new level of requirements or demands. And I'm wondering, for you and others, how we deal with this issue, or whether it's, to what extent that can be a problem.
I think in the last 2 years within our district and the partnership with this foundation, we've been training our teachers in order to implement Common Core in classrooms. I've been going to that training as a leader of a school, and one of the greatest challenges that you hear from staff who is working directly with the teachers is the shift in how they are engaging students to think, number one, how they're encouraging them to ask questions, how they are asking students to explain and accepting various options for that, and to shift in the classroom from a teacher-led standpoint to a facilitative mode. And that is the struggle that teachers are having. So extremely so with the math teachers. They love to have me in the training because I am the worst math student and always have been historically. My brother's an architect, and the face of his math teacher when he saw that I was his sister in high school, I think he was horrified because it is not one of my talents. So when I go to the training with the math teachers, one of the things is they will always give me the problem to work out because I do not think like a math student. And they're always amazed at my explanation. And I'm always aghast at the fact that somehow my explanation as a struggling learner is not within the frame of reference of what they're accustomed to. So I think the work that's being done directly with the teachers is extremely important. The challenge is, how do we support those teachers, not just in those pull-out sessions or after-school trainings, but how do you make time in a school day for those conversations to continue? Because otherwise what we're going to see is the failure or the repeating and the tendency to have students repeat instead of move on.
So a number of questions on acceleration. And particularly, so Jim and Bettina, one of the questions asked, it gets back to the issue of equity. And, you know, are we headed back potentially where the vast majority of accelerated students are white and Asian, while Black and Latino students are on the so-called lower track? And therefore, is this sort of another potential dead end? And how do we deal with that if that, in fact, is a potential?
The answer is yes. And I don't have the answer. You know, one of the, you know, right here in Silicon Valley, there's a lot of the companies have started to produce their employment data on minorities. Google as being sort of at the forefront of this, and they recently released a report that said less than 2% of their staff were African American, which means a lot lower percentage of engineers there. So that translates, unfortunately, to mean that it's easier, it's more likely that an African American child in San Jose will be a member of an NFL football team than an engineer at Google. And that is a very frightening situation, and it's with what is happening right now. So, you know, one of the other predictors for achievement to look at is zip codes. Zip codes are almost the best statistic for looking at achievement there is. So what we have to do is find the resources for parents to be part of the process so that families can take more control of their child's academic journey. I think Common Core lends itself to that with its sort of cross-district work and a focus towards families in being part of the process and with technology. I think we are fooling ourselves if we rely on an answer that there's a digital divide that is too large to accomplish. We do instructional coaching in math in Los Angeles Unified at Jefferson High School, which scored lowest. They were one of the top, or I shouldn't say top. They were one of the lowest API performers in the state 4 years in a row. And we created some Casey prep tests for algebra students, Algebra 1 students. And I had some students call me over and say, "Mister, can you come over here? We haven't had this at all. Can you help me with this question?" And it was adding fractions. So this is high school. So everything here, I think we're all singing on the same hymn sheet here, that we need to move to a system where we can get support to the people, the families, and the students that need it the most. And in this class, we couldn't get online with 44 students to get the technology running, but 3 of the students said, "Hey, I can create a hotspot, I'll get going." So folks have access to technology. We just have to create a system where we're encouraging families to be more a part of their educational journey. And that does not mean going to PTA meetings. That means helping them find curriculum, helping them to use the internet to help to find the right curriculum that could help to support their student, their family.
Thank you. Bettina, did you?
I would just like to add one thing and then pass it along, because I do know that we're doing significant work in a school district with this. But I'm very glad to hear, well, first of all, we're still in the point where there's a gap, okay? The second thing is, I'm glad that the point came up that there's a correlation between zip codes, okay? And I think that's significant because sometimes we focus on whether it's the ethnic factor or anything else, but in the district that I come from, there are schools that are very similar in the sense of the type of students that they have, which means that they're diverse student groups. The numbers are very different. And I hesitate often with this question because in the school that I am at, as everywhere else, the lowest performing students are Latino students. The highest performing students happen to be our Vietnamese students because we're 70% and 30%. Yet, 7 miles down the street, we have another high school. And in that high school, it's one of our high schools, the lowest performing Latino students are performing at 37% higher than my highest performing Vietnamese students. And that's the factor that gets lost oftentimes. And that has to do more with the socioeconomic status, poverty, and access to resources. So I think for me, when I hear this question, it's our obligation also to remember that. And the zip code factor is extremely significant. And also in taking a look at versus gaps that we have that we're not excelling in one area or another, to look at where there are opportunities to close those things or to bridge so that resources are available for families. So I'm going to pass this on to Superintendent Funk, because I know since he's been in leadership, that has been one of the focuses, not looking at the deficit, but looking at what can be maximized. So I would like him at least to say something briefly.
Well, thanks, Bettina. So let me do two parts to that question. The first part, to touch on the zip code, it really isn't, to me, about the ethnicity. It really is an economic factor, because the economic factor drives the opportunity gap. And it's the opportunity gap, access to quality schools, quality teachers, quality coursework, rigorous coursework, health care, early childhood education. Those are really the reasons that formulate or manifest into the achievement gap. And so if we do not address the opportunity gap, that's going to be a critical miss coming from this seminar today. The other piece, though, around Common Core that I believe is more, it's hopeful on my part, is that in the traditional sequence, your math teachers would refuse to allow a student that got an F in either semester of Algebra 1 to move on to geometry. They had to get a C or better to move on. What the Common Core allows, as Neil mentioned, is you are reviewing and spiraling back up and around the key standards all 3 years. It's not being taught in isolation. So what that's allowed at least our math teachers to understand is, well, maybe if a student fails the first semester and passes the second semester, let's move them on to course 2 because they're going to hit those standards again and have a chance to demonstrate their mastery of that. And by the end of course 3, now they're going to have had multiple chances to demonstrate mastery. You would not have had that mindset with previous teachers. We've also talked about the fact that we know a student that failed algebra, taking it for the second time is demoralizing. Teaching the same way 2 years in a row is not going to be successful. So our math teachers have also agreed that if a student fails both semesters, if they go to summer school, we're not offering the entire course in summer school. We're identifying the 3 or 4 key modules that need to be taught that summer, and if the students pass that, they move on to course 2 the next year. As well as if they pass course 2 with a C or better, we will go back and automatically give them the full credit for course 1. Because again, the standards are now spiraling and you're not teaching them in isolation.
So a question here relates to that, and it kind of is, how do we make math more engaging and interesting and fun? And perhaps maybe that's one of the goals of a well-taught Common Core course, but perhaps Jim or anyone in your experience, have you noticed things that are more, ways that are more engaging than not?
Well, I would just say quickly that in San Mateo County, we've got a network of teachers who've formed that we're facilitating, sort of coming together around project-based learning. So certainly project-based learning has been around for a long time. People have sort of rediscovered it, I think, in many places. But it is a way to make, to both have an integrated course. So project-based learning is there's a project at the end, and they are interdisciplinary projects that students complete together. And so teachers from K to 12 are talking about, well, how do we create these interdisciplinary units and lessons? I think the challenge is that they're remarkably complicated and complex things to then tease out exactly, well, what is the math involved in filling up this tub full of water, right? There's lots of math involved, but that's an example of a kind of project that some of the teachers work on. I think that's one of the ways in which people are trying to make the math more interesting, if you will. I also think that the Common Core itself lends itself, as you indicated, to a kind of sense making in math that's really important. But again, I will come back to the fact that I don't know that we have lots and lots of faculty who are ready for all of that, especially as you get into the higher levels of mathematics. There's a way in which math has been very much teacher-directed, student receiving, and you either got it or you didn't. So again, I think there's this black box that if we can just sort of get kids through the right course sequence, students will do fine. There's things that happen in those course sequences that are actually really difficult, and we've got, the average high school teacher has 120 to 140 kids. We're asking teachers to pay attention to all 140 of them in a very diagnostic, day-to-day kind of way. Really? 140 students? So there's that. Then we also want you to do it in this project-based kind of way that may be very different from the way you taught math, or maybe even the way you think math should be taught. And so I think there's just an important, very, very, I think, probably expensive, but important to build the capacity of our teachers and our educators to be able to deliver on this kind of integrated, interesting mathematics instruction. And I think we've tried to undervalue the professional development and the support that's really needed. I mean, one of the things that's come out of this project in the South, in Redwood City this year, and over the last couple of years, in this early learning math initiative, is that it costs about $500,000 to train 2 schools worth of teachers really well in how to teach math. So the question is, all right, well, is that too much money? I'm not sure it's too much money. I think that's actually how much money it costs to really train well your teachers and your staff and support them in a comprehensive way. And we don't ever want to talk about the fact that it costs a lot of money for these things, but it really should cost a lot of money to retool a system that's not been very effective at producing outcomes for all kids.
This is a slightly different answer, considering I'm not an educator. I'm a capitalist, right? The C word. But the relevant piece here is, how do you create excitement around math, right? One of the ways that you, I think, create excitement is essentially show someone what the consequence of a good decision is that comes from a modeling or from a math question or a math challenge. And so when you introduce this concept of success, and success actually can be measured in terms of, did you buy this piece of real estate or did you fund this particular venture, there's a consequence to doing well. And this is part of why I'm involved in this process, is because I'm trying to integrate between the private sector of many companies, what they're looking for. They're not just looking for the engineer, they're not looking for the person who scored an 800 on their entrance exam. We're looking at kids who connect with what the end result could be of what this initiative is all about. You are all the experts, but I'm sitting here as a businessman owning a company with 40, 50, 100 people. I want them to be able to calculate pretty basic stuff, because there's a connection between the ability to calculate and analyze and success, and it gets translated in the form of remuneration. That sounds crazy, right? You're talking about 4th graders, 8th graders, senior high people, great. But this is the reality, people. This is what this is all about. So it's a horrible statistic, by the way. So how do you translate a challenge mathematically into something that has relevance as you become older and see the result of your success?
One quick anecdotal story. We're working, like I said, with the San Jose Public Library, and working with 44 high school students. And we did sort of an IDEO design phase with them and had them think about all the activities that they could learn from out of school, and those activities they could learn in school. So what are the things that you would like to learn, or that other people would like to learn? So they made this long list. Math was on the list, among lots of other things, including kickboxing and fencing and everything else. Math came in absolutely last, okay? Now these are the students that put it on there. However, robotics came in first. So part of it, the math is everywhere. You can't, the idea of not being a math person, I think, we're starting to lose that, especially with the growth mindset sort of theory about how, your mind can actually change in 6 weeks by doing questions. And I push back a little bit on the failure issue of taking the same classes over. In general, I agree with it, but what do high school, at least high school boys, a lot of girls too, do as soon as they get home from school? They go on the video game. The video game is failure, 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 success. Failure, 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 success. They know what that they need to succeed, and they keep trying until they do that. So some of that energy, some of that intelligence that's happening in Silicon Valley has to be put into education. I think children are used to being, nowadays, are goal-oriented, are task-oriented, and can learn from failure. And I think we have to challenge our students to learn from failure. That's what engineering and a lot of math is all about. Any mathematician will tell you it's failure, failure, and then success. So we need to not be afraid of putting students through that mind exercise of failing.
So Brian, I appreciate that answer, Jim. And moving away from strictly math to larger issues, what are the indicators? What are potential indicators in middle school, college, and career readiness besides proficiency rates and grades, and which are as important as they are, that perhaps districts should be considering when they do their LCAPs, or perhaps even the state board, the local control and accountability plans that all districts have to do, and the state board is going to come out with performance standards that it wants every district to reach, and some of those have nothing to do with academics per se. It's related to school climate and student engagement. So looking at middle school, what are some other indicators we should be looking at as for college and career readiness?
So you put me on the spot.
I did, because you've been
working
working
guys,
on it.
and I do work on the LCAP too in my office. So I don't see a lot of explicit indicators. Honestly, I see a lot of the prescribed indicators, so not a lot of local indicators. But I think certainly our districts are putting in, for example, things like we see in a couple of LCAPs in this county, the 4 C's, right? Creativity, collaboration, right? These sort of new ways of thinking about what the competencies of students should be as indicators of readiness for future jobs, but certainly readiness for college in the short run. So I think some of our districts have some of that. I think that certainly even things like attendance, even though we think they're fairly pedestrian, sort of metrics, are really important indicators about whether or not this is actually all that interesting to anybody. Would you show up to actually involve yourself in it on a day-to-day basis? So I think, it's also making sense of the indicators that are fairly easily gotten and fairly simple, kind of interpreting those for other purposes, like, to what extent are our students voting with their feet and their families voting with their feet, both in terms of a day-to-day attendance, but maybe even showing up at all to this school district or going to a private school. And so I think there are, our folks are so kind of, I think, caught up in many ways with the logistics and the compliance with the LCAP in many of our districts in San Mateo County. And because, again, they don't have tons of capacity at the district office to make this a really robust, because of the size of our districts. We have lots of little tiny school districts. There are 23 in San Mateo County. One could argue whether there should be 23 or not, but there are 23 from one school to, about 20 in the biggest district in this county. And they struggle with being able to really, I think, make the best use of the LCAP as a way to inform, engage, and rally their communities to talk about returns on investment that are. And so I think, again, there are teachers. I would just go back to teachers also in terms of professional development and the kind of support that they're receiving, and are we adequately supporting their needs to deliver on this kind of new curriculum? So there are folks also here. I mean, there's one person right next to me who gets to write an LCAP as well. So maybe he can say something about it.
God, the second person that directed a question to me. So I think, in Eastside, we are developing our graduate profile to help measure the 21st century or the soft skills or the 4 C's. We have a 5th C, civic engagement. Those are the things that are critical that we've heard from private sector that they want employees that are able to think critically, analyze data, communicate across different platforms, and be able to work together, collaborate in teams. And so those are our 4 C's as well as civic engagement. But I think what the state 8 priorities does now is, instead of just focusing on one academic score, there are a lot of sub-indicators tied to those 8 priorities. As was mentioned, was attendance, your dropout rate, your graduation rate, your student engagement, your suspension rate, your parent involvement, your parent education, things of that nature I think are critical. The other piece that we don't spend a whole lot of time on, and when you look at your Googles and you look at your Apples, why do people want to work there? Because the culture is critical. It's not just that you are sitting through 6 periods a day for 55 minutes. You have opportunities to engage across curriculum, across departments. You focus on the social emotional learning. We have not spent any time since No Child Left Behind in the last 15 years. It's all been about test prep. But we do not focus on the whole child, the mindfulness, the social emotional intelligence needed to be successful to move on to higher level. And I think the LCAP allows for us to include those type of measures moving forward.
Good, thanks. So A to G covers seven different subject areas, and obviously math is important, but what's the biggest subject hurdle for students to achieve a full A to G education? Anyone?
Yeah, math, right? It's the gateway drug to higher level course taking.
Okay, anything else other than that? Bettina?
I would say math and science, and I think the other challenge is as districts look at what the sequence pathways or course sequences are, is to be mindful of the fact that we should be looking at ways to allow students to take the options that are available to them when they're available to them, and not to create policies or practices that dictate a course to be taken at a certain time for a different reason. So the part in the presentation where it allowed those A through G courses and more work to be done with allowing students and counselors to come together and come up with a plan of the sequence of areas that they want to take them. For instance, for second language learners to take geometry at the point where they are at the sophomore year, or some type of integrated with that, that might cease to be an option if they're still struggling with the language, because that's heavily focused on that. So it would be nice to see that those are options that are available to students, but at the same time, you have to have the resources to be able to have somebody serving those students and having those conversations with them and their families.
I would just simply also add science in middle school. Science in middle school is critical. In our feeder districts, we do not have one middle school that offers a full year science program that feeds into our district. Coming from San Jose Unified, you do not have full year science programs at the middle school. A couple schools might have a section in 8th grade, but in general, we do not pay attention to science in middle school. We don't have the facilities for them in middle school. So I think it's almost as critical as the math issue.
I'll say from the foundation perspective, part of the problem with the A to G is that people aren't even aware of it. It's shocking to me, all these different students and different administrators in different districts in Santa Clara County, they're aware of what the requirements are, but it's not being communicated clearly enough to the predominant student body. And that's one thing that, working with Manny and working at the foundation in terms of a public advocacy position, it's really opened my eyes to the fact that these kids are capable, but they're not made aware of really what the requirements are early on in their 4-year career, which is incredible to me. A lot of it is about communication. A lot of it is about laying out what your opportunities are that you can gain by completing the A to G requirements. I mean, I think it's also interesting that we're calling it a default curriculum, and it's not, actually you can complete the A to G curriculum, but it's not considered to be a requirement for graduation. I'm not sure how long that's going to be that way, but my position on A to G is that if we can communicate this to administrators from the superintendent level down to principal level, down to the board level, down to the student, and down to the parent level, where all of these kids, doesn't matter what socioeconomic group you come from, doesn't matter what your zip code is, as long as you're made aware of the fact that this is an option, that this is made available to you, and if you don't like it or it's too hard, you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. But at least providing the information, a roadmap to go from a 9th grade position to graduating with the 15 basic requirements to get into UC or into CSU is the lowest denominator we could actually present to our students. This is low fruit. My God, we're talking about communicating a concept. communicating an opportunity. And that's what the foundation has really taken a huge initiative in Santa Clara County. And that's one of the reasons why I'm highly supportive of what we do.
Just one more challenge of A through G, and this is an issue with the UC system and the UC regions, and that is computer science is a major hurdle in the A through G because it's considered G credit. UC will not allow it to be considered a math or science credit. So when you're looking at a student that's trying to figure out what courses to take, 4 years of math, 4 years of science, because again, 15 is minimum, 18 is recommended, but if you really want to put yourself in competition for Berkeley, for Stanford, you're taking about 20 to 22 of those courses. And if you can't take computer science because it's an elective credit, then that's why you're seeing a challenge for high schools offering computer science.
Yeah, that gets to sort of a larger question that I had, Chris. And Jim, we've recognized that there are not enough minority students eligible to do calculus and get into STEM. But then we have this other students who may not need Algebra 2 for the majors and interests that they have in college. And we have Algebra 2 as the filter for a system that doesn't have enough room for all students. And so there are other states that are rethinking Algebra 2, perhaps redesigning it with more statistics and for courses, even for biology majors for whom stats and data are the key thing. Is there a message, and I'm really interested in you too, Neil, is there a message that we should be sending UC and CSU to rethink this fundamental qualifications? Anybody have any thoughts? Is that the last question? That's a good one again, I guess. Yeah, anybody got any thoughts? If not, we'll...
Well, let Neil take this one. I think he's ready for it. He's chomping at the mouth.
Look, the general issue is an alignment question, and I wouldn't be the first person to say I think that the way in which the A to G pipeline has been determined, the way the certifications work, the way that the reviews happen, it's time honored, but I think that there have been over recent years some pushes and shoves on it. Particularly, I think there's been a lot of good progress made to make the work of linked learning and some of the career and technical education in much more applied settings fit some of those requirements in really some thoughtful ways. So it's not as though it's inflexible. There have been some demonstration of some good progress. But I think the point about computer science and something that is clearly so incredibly relevant, there isn't a person coming out of a high school pipeline who isn't going to need some level of coding fluency to make it in this world. Those are obvious ways, John, where the system has to be able to keep up with the pace of change.
I think there's sort of two questions to that. The first is, here's the system we have that exists. And in the system we have that exists, A through G is it, and absolutely everybody should have that information. It should not be a secret that this is what you need to do if you want to go to one of these schools. But where did all of these requirements come from? And why do we have them all anyway? And I think that needs to be looked at also, because I think there's some tail wagging the dog in some of this. If you want to look at, if you backward map from different careers or interests people have in life, they don't need all this stuff. And that's not the only way to get there. So I think there are two issues there, and there are other states. An article just came out about looking and saying, well, why are we having these requirements for this major? So it's just hard to move the system. The system's very entrenched. Everyone who's got their part wants to keep that going. And I do think we need, and that's part of why I think the longitudinal data is so important. Let's start looking at what you need to do X, Y, or Z.
Good, thank you. I wish we had more time for, I know that integrative paths are really important to a number of folks here, and I'm hoping perhaps Neil, Louise, and others might stay a little bit to address some of your very specific questions as to which routes are best or alternatives. So with that, I'll turn it over, and thank you, panelists.
I want to thank John and the panel and our researchers, Louise and Neil. Thank you so much. And we plan, John and I have already been conspiring on really tackling some of these issues deeper in the fall, especially the whole issue of math acceleration. So thank you very much. At this point, our final Words to you will come from my colleague, Mark Berman. But first, come on up, Mark. But I do want to thank the rest of the Silicon Valley Education Foundation colleagues, Bob Nichols, I see Dan Mosier, Emmett, Bonnie, Colleen, who else? Jennifer Ryland, and of course my assistant, Michelle Moschel, who does all this background stuff for us. So Mark, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Manny, and thank you guys all so much for joining us today. This is our first event that we've had in San Mateo County, and we're really looking forward to getting more engaged in San Mateo County. This summer, we're going to be operating our flagship Elevate classes in 9 classes in San Mateo County. That's up from 3 classes last summer and 0 classes the summer before, so our graph is definitely moving in the right direction. We obviously wouldn't be able to provide these programs and make such a difference in students' lives if it weren't for the generosity of some of our supporters. So I just wanted to recognize some of our supporters who are here today. We have Charlie Simmons in the back, who's been a supporter of our Elevate classes in the Ravenswood School District. The folks at Saris Regis, development company based in Foster City, who are supporting our Elevate programs this summer in Foster City, San Mateo School District, and in the Redwood City School District. We have Vicki Tung from Texas Instruments, Texas Instruments has been a big supporter of ours over the years for our Elevate program and for all the work that we do. Obviously, John Miller on our board and our biggest A to G advocate, who's really given us the resources we need to get the success that we've had in Santa Clara County and the success we hope to have in San Mateo County. Faisal Sohail, who's also one of our board members, has been for a long time, joined us today. So thank you guys all so much. I also want to thank Megan Jordan, who was here earlier from GSV Labs, for all the help she's given. Marlon Evans, their CEO, for letting us use this fantastic space today. I'm going to be taking on that climbing wall as soon as this event's over. So if anyone wants to watch me make a fool of myself, I'll be there. And lastly, everybody you've heard from today so far is what I'd call a giver. They've been giving you information. They've provided us resources at the organization. My role today is a little different. It's a bit more of a taker. And I'm hoping to take your advice, your information, your contacts, the way that we've met a lot of our supporters who give us the resources we need to provide the programs we do is from referrals. People, are having a conversation with somebody. They hear they're really really care a lot about education, really passionate about education, and they connect that person to the Silicon Valley Education Foundation, where we provide the programs that make such a difference in students' lives. We don't have that many of those contacts in San Mateo County. I'm spending some time every day trying to reach out to companies or reach out to individuals. But if you guys know about companies that are really kind of community driven and community engaged and care about education, or if you know about individuals in the community who care about education and want to give back, they've been successful, let us know, let me know. I'll stick around afterwards. You can come up and find me, or you can reach me at Mark, that's M-A-R-C, at svefoundation.org. You can also find me on the website. So I just wanted to make a pitch for any contacts or suggestions you guys have, and thank you guys so much for spending your Wednesday afternoon with us today. So thanks so much.